All right, so we're going to be talking about research designs and internal and external validity today. And so this is going to be the first part in a two-part lecture. In the first part of the lecture, I'll go over some basic kind of terminology and background regarding research designs. And then in the second part of the lecture, I'll talk about mostly about internal validity, issues around internal validity, namely some of the reasons why it's not always easy to assume that internal validity exists in our studies, and so we'll go ahead and get started here. First off, we're talking about research designs, okay? And so just a quick definition of a research design. This is a little bit different from what I'm calling a methodology. Remember that you have several papers due in this class. One is your intro paper, you have your lit review, and then you have your methodology paper. The research design for me, the way that I'm thinking about it, it could conceivably be used interchangeably with what we're calling the methodology section, but the way that I'm thinking about it is more so in the way of kind of one portion of the methods, right? And namely the first part of the method section. The design is basically, your system or your plan. I guess for me, it's more of a structure than anything else than a system. It's a structure that you put in place for carrying out your research projects. Typically speaking, for most of our students, there's kind of two designs in place. I think for most of our students, either you have a program evaluation type of design, or you have a correlational design. Okay. And so this lecture is mostly concerned with those program evaluation type designs. If your research study pertains to evaluating the effectiveness of some program or some intervention, then this is probably an important talk for you. Okay, if you're thinking more so along the lines of a correlational study, then although that's also research design, that's not the way that I'm using the term for this lecture, and so. This is all to say that this lecture is mostly about program evaluation designs then, okay? So the components may include other things like data sources, data collection procedures involved in your program evaluation. Okay, maybe not so much sampling, but certainly, the way that you go about collecting your data is important to your design, okay? There are different types of designs, basically experimental, quasi-experimental, and I'm not just pronouncing that strangely, okay? Most researchers, we pronounce that quasi as opposed to quasi, and then there are pre-experiments. Okay, how do you tell the difference between experiments and quasi-experiments and pre-experiments? Well, these you have to ask yourself a few questions, right? So you have to ask yourself, well, are there multiple groups? Okay, are there multiple groups being compared in my study? Right? Are there comparison groups, in other words? Some of you have certain groups that you're running, right? So I often I've told many of you think about a possible comparison group, right? Do you have multiple groups that you might be comparing? Okay, that's the first question to ask. Then you want to think, well, are there multiple waves? Okay, by waves I'm talking about several rounds of observations, right? Is it going to be a snapshot or a one-time survey, or is it, are you engaging in multiple observations? Okay, that's what I mean by waves. If your answer, okay, so if there's multiple groups, then there should also be random assignment. Okay, so if you have random assignment, you have multiple groups, you have multiple waves of data collection, and if you answer yes, the only way that you have an experimental design is if you answer yes to all of those three questions. If any of those answers, right? If any of the answers to those three questions is no, then you have a quasi or pre-experiment. Okay. You've seen the tic-tac-toe before. You've seen the notation, right? The zeros and the x's, the r's and the n's, and you see the notation here and what they indicate, right? Take a look with me at the diagram here. You can see that you have these r's here, which indicates random assignment. Right? You have your sample that was randomly assigned, your study sample that was randomly assigned to one of two groups here. You have multiple groups being compared. Okay, you have two rows, and those rows correspond to groups. You have multiple waves of observations. You have time point one. Okay, time moves from left to right, so you have time point one, time point two. You have multiple waves of observation. Two waves of observations here, and then you have the x, which is the treatment or stimulus. Okay, and the treatment occurs in between, right, as a matter of time, in between the first and second observations. Okay, you've seen that before, certainly. There's a distinction between random assignment and random selection. This is important. Okay, note the purpose behind each of these. Right, there's a different purpose behind why you randomly assign and why you randomly select. The reason why you randomly select, we talked about random selection before when we were discussing sampling procedures. But you engage in random selection where you want your sample. Okay, the whole purpose behind random sampling is that you want your sample to be as similar or as representative as possible from the larger population, from which it was drawn. Okay? In other words, you want to be able to draw inferences, or you want to be able to generalize to the population from which your sample was drawn. That's why we randomly select, but random assignment has a different purpose. Okay? The purpose behind random assignment is to make sure your comparison groups, okay, if you're randomly assigned, you have at least two groups for your study. What you're trying to do is make your two groups as similar as possible. Okay, you're making those two groups as similar as possible. That's what random assignment actually does, okay, is make those groups equivalent, so that all things being considered, you're trying to control for all the things that you can't see, right? And so this is all to say that you're trying to isolate the effect of treatment on some outcome that you're observing, on a specific outcome that you're observing. Okay, so we use fancy language here, internal validity and external validity as the main objectives for random assignment and random selection. So internal validity, okay, that's why we randomly assign, okay, and that's to make sure that that's the degree of confidence that you have, right, that your treatment is in fact causing any changes that you see between pretest and post-test. Okay. External validity, like I said, is about generalizability. That's across different populations, across time, across different settings, right? And maybe even to the theoretical population. Okay, generalizability versus the confidence that we have in the treatment, or causality, the confidence that we have in the causal mechanism being studied. This is just visually what I've just talked to you about. We talked about starting with the theoretical population, the sampling procedure. In the sampling process, you have an access population. You have a listing, okay, of people from which you draw. You draw your sample, and then it's at that point that you actually randomly assign. Okay, for those of you who are really visual, you can see that random assignment occurs later on. Okay, normally if we're face to face, I do a quick demo where I would just flip a coin. Right, I would just move through the class and flip a coin, heads or tails, assign you to either one of two groups, either the heads group or the tails group, and we could, if you're not sensitive about it, we could measure something like height, and we would find that all things considered, right, the height of the two groups after you've been randomly assigned will come out to be very similar. The more people I randomly assign, it's likely that those two groups will be very similar in the way of height. And that's just representative of all the other things too, where those two groups should be as similar as possible if they've been randomly assigned. Okay. A little more about designs. I mean, this is kind of textbook material, right? You have classic experimental designs. We talked about the major, criteria that are required. You need random assignment. You need multiple groups being observed. You need multiple waves of observations, right? And this is what this is showing here. Okay. There are variations, of course, right? You see in both of these kind of variations of experiments, right? You still see random assignment, right? In both of these designs, you see the multiple waves of observations. You see the multiple groups being compared. The question then is, not about how to draw these tic-tac-toes, but when to use a particular model, right? And so, this is a case where you have two different types of treatments, right? Maybe you have two different types of groups that are being run, okay? And the kids were randomly assigned. That's what this is indicating. This is, if you have one treatment, but you want to make sure that each group is in fact getting fair treatment, maybe you want to withhold treatment for a while, and then you check back with that group, and you eventually introduce the treatment to the second group, but at a later point in time here with a waitlist control design. Okay. As a practical matter, it's not always possible to randomly assign, and you can imagine, if there's a treatment out there that's very valuable. I mean, think about COVID-19 right now, right? And those who are participating in clinical trials, well, those people are being randomly assigned. Okay, those people, that's the gold standard for research, where there's random assignment. And so where you have something quite valuable like a COVID-19 vaccine, then it doesn't seem quite fair, does it? That one group should get the vaccine and the other doesn't. And so, the next best alternative is engaging in a process called matching. In theory, it sounds easy, but it's a little more complicated. But essentially, you're creating combinations. You're sort of, you're taking multiple variables and you're creating sort of subgroups with those multiple variables. So, again, the idea with random assignment is that you try to make the two groups as similar as possible. If you can't randomly assign, then you find some observable criteria. You say, well, let's match in the way of income, right? You have two people, you make sure their income levels are the same, make sure their ages are the same, and then, once you have those pairs matched up, then you randomly assign one to treatment, one to control. Okay, that's another way to sort of substitute for randomization. It's called matching. Okay, I've done sort of a variation on this in one of my studies. I talked to you guys about my SNAP study. And so that's what I'm showing here. Okay, food security. I matched on food security status, and then also in the way of health here. Okay. Of course, you have quasi-experiments, right? This is, of course, where any of those three criteria that we talked about at the very beginning of this talk here, if any of those three criteria have not been met, right? No random assignment. You don't have multiple waves of observations or multiple groups being compared. Those are considered quasi. Okay. This one is called a non-equivalent comparison group design. The only difference between this design and the in the classic experiment that we saw before is that here you have the n's instead of the r's, right? So no random assignment here. Okay. Most of you will be probably using some type of pre-experimental design, right? You might have some intervention, and then you give out a survey, a one-time measurement. It's okay. These are less sophisticated, but it's okay. That's the best we can do. Okay. That's what this notation is showing. You run a support group, and then you take your measurement. Let's say it's stress levels, right, afterwards. This is a one-group pretest, post-test. Maybe you measure stress levels before the support group. You run your support group, and then you measure stress levels after the support group. Okay. Here's a quick point about the usefulness of having multiple pretests. Okay. If you do end up using a pre-experimental design, which most of you will, I think, at the very least, before you run your support groups or run your groups, whatever groups that you're running, right? Many of you are running groups, by the way. It's a good idea to try to include multiple pre-test observations. Okay, it's going to strengthen the case that you make for the effectiveness of your treatment. Okay, and that's what this is showing. If you can include two measurements before running your groups, or even three for that matter, that's going to really strengthen your study if you can. Okay, and this is just a quick reason why. I'm just trying to show you with numbers here. If your study is about the number of times that students in your class on average, if you have 6 kids and you're counting the number of times that they act out, right? Your study is about socio-emotional development. Behavioral outcomes in school, and let's say in this particular study, right? In this particular study, you have four different pretest observations, right? In all three of these different iterations of the study, you have 4 pretest observations. Here you can see that the behavioral infractions, you got 10 in the first observation, you got 9, you got 11, you got 10. You have some relative stability here, right? It seems to be somewhat stable. Here you can see that it's 10, 9, 8, 7 through the first 4 observations. It's already declining. And here, this is all over the place. 10, 14, 7, 12, up and down, okay? Which one gives you the most confidence that your group that you ran is most effective? Number 1 of the 3. Number 1 appears to be the most effective because you have confidence that it was pretty stable, and then your treatment was introduced, and then the behavioral infractions went down.